Welcome to our June 2025 CIOs and EdTech Leaders webcast. I'm David Couch with the Department of Education. And this is something, if you're brand new to us, this is something we do once a month. And for those that are watching, make sure that you have your mics muted unless you have a speaking role. We do have people assigned, just like for anything, to go around and watch this. We call them the muters, but you can really help them out by making sure, unless you have a speaking role or speaking, you keep your mic muted. We have a really short agenda today. June is typically not a month that we have a lot of folks that are watching. They're on vacation, taking well-deserved time off, but this is always available to folks when they return from vacation. And we also do the summary notes of it. I sent the summary notes for May. I'll be sending you soon the summary notes for April. The reason we didn't have that earlier is we did our webcast earlier than normal in May. And so I'll send you those for your review as well for those that weren't there. So let's talk about the items on the agenda today. We're going to talk about funding first. There's some not so good news and there's some really good news. The first one is from the $4.3 million request for the U.S. Department of Education. This is federal funds that were approved last September to go toward education technology initiatives and projects that we got notice in late March that had been denied, even though they had been approved by the U.S. Department of Education in September. They were denied in late March. So we being the Department of Education, applied for reconsideration of just not that $4.3 million, but all the items that were denied by the U.S. Department of Education back in late March. So far, close to 100% has been denied again by the U.S. Department of Education. I want to say 99.9% has been denied, and this does include the school districts as well, just not K, the agency. And the ones that were approved were for very little dollars, $10,000, $20,000 types of dollars. And so it's very minor. The number of districts that were done and the KD agencies that were done. Probably one of the most disappointing parts was we were under the standing that anything that was purchased before March 28th, 2025, we would be reimbursed for. And they've also denied that as well. So the next steps is the Department of Education plans to either join other states or issue its own legal action to get those funds on behalf of school districts, on behalf of K, the agency. So that will be the next step going forward with that decision. The next thing that happened also impacts education technology. The U.S. House voted last week to 100% eliminate all funding for the Corporation of Public Broadcasting. And the Corporation of Public Broadcasting is what helps fund PBS. Obviously, we're a major user in this state, and we talked about that, I want to say, in October, November, of PBS Learning Media for the students and teachers across the state. We are power users of that and have been of that tool for over a decade. So that's a pretty major cut of an instructional content tool for our teachers and our students going forward. It also will impact the PBS shows, because a lot of the funding goes toward that, obviously. And Kentucky Educational Television gets a large part of their funding from the Corporation of Public Broadcasting. They have other funding sources, but it will definitely have a devastating impact on their programming that is used beyond the normal PBS channels and the PBS learning media that's out there. The U.S. Senate now votes on it next. I know folks are working on that with Kentucky Education Television and other ones, and we're hoping the best for that, but I want to make sure you understand that that has a major instructional impact on Kentucky K-12 schools. On the good news item, and I sent this soon after our Kentucky Board of Education meeting, for the very first time since we've been asking for additional budget requests, the KETS funding was selected in the Kentucky Board of Education's top 5 of funding priorities for the 2026 legislative session. And it was encouraging to actually listen to board members that we had on there. Lee Todd, a former president of the University of Kentucky, obviously with his technology background, was very supportive. as were the former superintendents that sit on our Kentucky Board of Education that were very supportive of raising it up there. And I do want to note that, increase of SEEK funding will always be number one up there. Transportation and preschool funding will always be there. But to make it to number 4 on that list is pretty impressive. And so the part that we're going to continue to ask districts to do is, while we understand that superintendents will want SEEK funding to remain a priority, I would ask you to, we are doing our part to make it a part of our board's priority. And what that means is every time we meet with the legislators, it will be part of those talking points as part of the top 5. Is we ask you to also, when you're talking with your superintendent, is try to say, hey, listen, I understand, SEEK funding needs to be a priority, but when a legislator talks to your superintendent about the KETS funding, it's important that your superintendent also say, hey, listen, it was a top 5 priority of the Board of Education. We are supportive of that for all the reasons. And I would tell you is, I constantly hear back in the top 5 feedback we get at the end of every year of the importance, for example, to keeping the KETS offers high. Well, that's the KETS funds is what does that, is the funding source that allows it to happen. There are certain key services that we provide on behalf of all school districts. And so it's really important to keep that funding there, as we've not got a cost of living increase since 1992. And so there are consequences of that funding being not raised up. We're trying to avoid those types of consequences. And obviously, I gave you some things that are no longer going to be there, or it looks like they're no longer going to be there, the previous 2 parts there. So it's important to raise and do something about the KETS funding. Our next step, a topic related to funding, and we do this every year, is we present to the Kentucky Board of Education our operational and financial plan for the next school year. And that's something that's required by law. We do it typically every August. But before I present it to the board, I present it to districts and I present it to our Office of Education Technology staff. And a lot of folks have already had input to that, but I'll let you see the final product of that before it goes to the board. And that'll be happening in July 15th for the districts, and for our Office of Education Technology staff. We will do it at our first OET team huddle that will occur before July 15th. So you'll get an insight of that before we take off with that. The policy and strategy of legislation update. As I noted, is the Auditor of Public Accounts and this is a private company, the Public Consulting Group, have been doing a study of the Kentucky Department of Education services for school districts since beginning last September. And so a high portion of the Department of Education staff has spent time with those organizations. They've also been interacting with school districts as well to get their feedback. Even though we do a variety of things to get your all's feedback. For example, we get the top 5 feedback with you all at the end of every year. They wanted a more, and they took the kind of things that Katie was already doing, but they also did their own independent kind of review of that. And so I'll be sharing those results when they come out. Like I say, we got them on June the 6th, and we have until the 23rd to respond. I can tell you preliminary results of it is from an Office of Education Technology perspective, was very pleased with the findings, extremely pleased with them. So besides saying that is, well, I'll share that will be definitely under a good news item for July. But I will share that in a little bit later, but I wanted to give you a heads up that that's coming. Next, we have the Kentucky School Board Association. And it's been looking at some policies, including our Kentucky K-12 responsible use policy. So Marty, I know you've been working with them and others. So what that you have on that?
Yeah. So last week or the week before, and we have actually, Dave, we have a poll question available. And if you haven't had a chance, we have 3 polls that are available right now. But one of those questions is all about understanding if we've had a chance yet to review the access to electronic media. That is in the KSBA policy manual, that is 082323. It's been modified, and that is to say that the model policy has been modified. We do know that there's a number of districts who have a very customized and personalized 082323 access to electronic media policy. Generally, we refer to that as the historically as the acceptable use policy, but the model policy has been modified and updated. I think it's a work in progress. We've talked about it since January or February on our webcast, but also we spent some time at our CIO summit on this topic. And so some of the updates that we have been working on and getting feedback from districts and other interested parties have been implemented in the new model policy. Things like the recognition of the responsible use as opposed to just acceptable use.
And I like the name change. It says a lot.
Love it. And we actually have now at least a dozen school districts who have already implemented the responsible use and wording in their customized policy. So again, if you're new to working with KSBA and the model policy work, there's the model policy that is pushed out that districts go through a process to accept that model, or you can customize and edit your policy. And so if you're a district who customizes 082323, then you want to look at that and see if you can pull in some of that language that can be helpful. Again, this is a work in progress, and we're building really collaborative work with the Kentucky School Boards Association on these policies that touch EdTech. So some of the other pieces beyond responsible use are the emerging technologies in AI. So now, like pulling in some basic language on emerging technologies, we can go further there through this policy, through this responsible use policy. That's important. Continue to get deeper into the emerging technology space, but recognizing where emerging technologies and AI play in with responsible use is super important. Also, House Bill 208, where it's recognizing cell phones and social media. Those language components are included in representation during instructional time and how to work through that, as well as Senate Bill 181 is also some languages pulled in, which I know we're going to talk about in depth. But the KSBA has pulled in some of that language into the responsible use policy, which is great. Now, in companion to that, they've also released 082324, which is solely targeting Senate Bill 181. And so we kind of think like we need to think about those together, review them together, make sure that we feel good about what they're saying, or customize them if needed. So the nudge today is to if you have not had a chance, and it looks like through the poll, David, that a vast majority of folks have had a chance to review. If you have not had a chance to review, your board will be going through reading of those. If not already, it will be very soon going through that reading. And you have an opportunity to weigh in. You have an opportunity to help coach up or lead through some of that language, which we believe is very helpful. This is long-standing work that we've been doing. The ideas of responsible use and digital citizenship are in our DNA of everything that we do with education technology, and these policies matter, and it's important to wrap your arms around them. I'll share just one quick story. I know that Neil Arnett and Pikeville Independent has done a tremendous job. He's kind of allowed me to be a fly on the wall on some of the work that they're doing there, and they took this very serious throughout this last year and brought lots of folks together, and they've customized their responsible use policy to fit their district. And I love to think about it as it's not just the product of the final document, it's the process, and the process to get everybody on board and to get people to weigh in on how they believe. This is kind of belief statements in a sense. And so it's been a neat process to watch along. So great job. High five to Neil and folks in district on that work.
And just to remind you, the 1998 law on internet safety and security, it had a couple major components. The first one was acceptable use, which in our next release of that, which will happen later this calendar year, is we'll update the wording from acceptable use to responsible use, which we always considered a major thing before you start trying to do technical things to have people do the right thing. You just use your school code of conduct for your teachers or for your adults and students. And then you have responsible use policy. And then you have your internet content management system, which we're talking about here a little bit later on with GoGuardian. Along with it has a component in there. It was a pre-Senate Bill 181 with traceable and inspectable communications, which we always understood the importance of having that. Now, the Senate Bill 181 is really between students and adults, but ours was between students, adults to adults, students and adults, and
All the
so
above.
all the above. Yeah, make sure they're using
And on campus and beyond
yeah,
campus.
right. Yeah, when they're using school provided, tools and services. So thanks, Marty.
Yep,
Thanks for your work
absolutely.
on that. So let's talk a little bit about Senate Bill 181 that came out of the 2025 session. That's relating to the traceable, I would call it inspectable too, communications when adults are digitally communicating with students. And that's been around, for a while. The importance of doing the right things with that, when you're communicating with students for the variety of ways. So let me give you a little bit of background. I'll go back to my time as a military officer. That's going way back. But an important part that you got before you did any kind of mission, military mission, is what is the commander's intent or the spirit behind the direction coming from the commander. Because that's really important. So as you're getting direction from anybody, is what is your general intent? Because you can have people look at words and read a lot into them and go to the extreme of it, which was not the commander's intent. So it was always important to me as a young officer is while you got, it's called an operations order, and it's a written thing that you do in the military, but the commander would come in and say, this is my intent. And it gave a lot of flexibility to the officers and the soldiers to do a mission without it being so prescriptive. And typically I find, as fast forward to legislation, there's a lot of latitude intentionally by legislators. And it's important as you're listening to legislation being created, is you get what the legislative intent was behind it. And there was a person that really looked closely with, I sent the article here on Senate Bill 181, what the intent of that was, what that was about.
You have to listen to the discussion.
And you listen to the discussion and you're understanding what the intent is. And sometimes we'll just ask legislators, especially if they're the champion of a piece of legislation, what is your intent? Because you're finding it's being read to the extreme, and it was not the intent to be read to the extreme or implemented to the extreme. And so you as I take a look at 181, I think it's important that it's not been read or interpreted to the extreme. I can tell you over the years since the birth of KETS, the Kentucky Education Technology System, there's always been the importance of appropriate use and now responsible use of technology. I can tell you is the parts of investigations that have occurred over the years between students and teachers, 99.9999% of them, when you're talking about digital communications, it has nothing to do with school provided technology. It has nearly 100% to do with personally owned smartphones and personally owned text, personally owned email, personally owned like social media accounts like a Facebook Messenger. That is what the legislative intent is. If you take a look at the creation of it, it's when you're having adults that are using really personal tools to communicate with someone and cross the line between, the kind of discussions they need to be having between an adult and a student. You take a look at the incidents that have happened in Kentucky to where action has actually been taken with inappropriate interaction between an adult and student with digital communications. I want to say it's 100%. I don't know of an exception of it, but it's been close to 100%. It's involving a personal text message, personal email accounts, and personal social media accounts that cannot be inspectable at all. The communication between them, and it's intentional because the folks there, they do not want that to be known. It is not relating to the ones that the tools that are out there. So I purposely sent you a couple articles here. So these got commas there. Marty, you said that's not one link. It's got commas, and it's almost in priority order. If you read the first one that came out in the Lexington area, and it talks about the kind of tools, and obviously the tools have been around for a while. For adults to communicate with school adults, communicate with school parents. Infinite Campus has that capability. We've had the email system. With Office 365 and Google Gmail now, those are inspectable. Obviously, those are out there, but there's other instructional tools that are out there that are used by school districts. And I thought the first article does a good job of talking about, things like Google Classroom is not considered one of those kind of things that you're doing. It's not a personally owned thing. That's not where it's happening at. It talks about Parent Square, and was it the other one on here is Dojo? Dojo, yeah, Dojo.
There
So
are several
there's-
applications.
And it's going to be a suite of tools. First of all, it's not going to be one. It's going to be a suite of them. And folks got to just remember what the intent is. I was a youth coach for a long time of multiple girls and boys sports. And this is going way back. Anytime I communicated with a student or a child or a player, I also communicated at the same time with the parent. I never communicated one-on-one with any student ever when I was a coach at any kind of level with texting. It was always including others that were out there. So, one of the things that's happened over the time is they're talking about how the coaches communicate with them and what are the exceptions for the coaches. I just hope, and the purpose of me sharing those articles, one is the article done, the first one I encourage you to take a look at. The second article is done by the person that led a lot to that law being established. And you can see, you get a feel for the legislative intent of that. You can see an article from Eastern Kentucky, from Western Kentucky, from a large school district. And I encourage you, in the districts to make sure that your legal staff and your leadership is not interpreting this to the extreme of cutting off basic instructional tools that are used in the classroom. Google Classroom would be one. As you said, is Chromebooks primarily use those. Is like, what's the purpose of Chromebooks if you can't use a lot of these tools that are out there? So make sure you're talking with other districts and making sure you're getting what the legislative or commander's intent really is behind it. And it was not going to the extreme. It was the basic tools. If you kind of take a look at this, of people using their personal text messages, their personal email accounts to communicate with students and students to them, and the social media tools, just not the posts, but within there, those tools have the ability to go offline and communicate with each other. And it takes me way back to the beginning of the birth of the internet. You had these rooms you could break out into, and I would always say that's where the bad stuff happens. They're not doing it openly. They're saying, "Hey, go meet me in this room and we'll talk virtually here." That's where the stuff happens, and they were personally owned types of things. So I know you're probably in your roles and districts getting those kind of things. I encourage you to read these articles, share it with each other, and really try to understand what the intent and the spirit of the law is, and try to keep folks from going to the extreme interpretation of what those laws are. Marty, any other comments?
Well, I think if you do have a chance to read or just check out the different articles, you're going to quickly take away that there's a lot of district decision here, and that different districts, your neighboring districts, and we've talked to superintendents who are thinking through this and working through this along with EdTech leaders and others, where neighboring districts are going to make different decisions, and they're going to take different approaches and interpret differently. There's a big piece here about being consistent internally. If we were like giving coaching points for all the conversations that we've had on this bill, there's gray area, and there are scenarios, and there's different contexts that come into play, and there is different decision opportunities, and neighboring districts want to make completely different decisions. The big deal is to, whenever your district makes a decision, try to be a part of that. You have until technically the 27th of June to work this out and come up with a communicated plan that's scripted through the legislative process, and try to be a part of those conversations if you can. Even if you're not being asked, try to ask, can we talk, can you give some insight? But the big deal is about being consistent. And so if you, for example, have a group of tools that are instructional tools that are all about formative assessment or formative approaches to learning, which includes feedback and things like that, they're instructional tools, and you can be consistent about that. That's fantastic. I talked to a district this morning who is focused on that. as well as identifying the group of tools that are in the communication system, the authorized traceable system. I think it's a good idea to identify what those tools and those authorized tools are that your district is leaning on. And then what are the procedures by which a parent can request to dig into those communications if needed. And each tool and each set of tools has a different approach to that. And knowing that ahead of time is helpful.
I
This is
remember,
a lot.
I can remember when we first did the internet, the safest thing is to totally unplug it.
That's
Because you had people say, I don't want, so you'll take the most extreme risk averse approach. You could take that, and there may be districts that really take that. But I would just encourage you to understand what is the intent and spirit behind that law. And obviously a district can go to the extreme behind it and go to, to really, cut off everything in there. But I can tell you is having seen the cases that have happened with misconduct between students and adults, it is the personally owned devices and the personally owned social media, the personally owned, account, the personally owned email account, and the personally owned text messaging. I want to say it's 100%, and maybe there is this rare exception, but that's what has been done, and that's what the actions have been taken, and they've been found in the investigations. It's not when they're using these common tools that are used in schools. That's not what that's about.
Hey, David, can I jump in real quick on this?
Yeah.
We, all of us, David and Marty have already said it very well. This is a district decision on what tool works out best for you, but we were getting a lot of questions about Infinite Campus and how it works. So we did ask Infinite Campus to put together a training on their tools and how, and the fact that they do meet these requirements. That training, if you're not part of the cases distribution list, went out yesterday. It's scheduled for June 24th at 2:00. I'm going to send a link in the chat right now that if you want to join that, or if you have somebody that might be interested, pass that along. Again, we're not encouraging, we're not saying this is the tool you're supposed to use. That's a local decision, but we want to give you more information about what Infinite Campus tools do offer.
Dee Dee, thank you I actually had a note to mention that. Thank you for that. I definitely, if I were back in a school district today, I definitely would have Infinite Campus Messenger as a part of the authorized tooling, right? So it's not the tool, it's a tool in the system. And I definitely would do that. And so thinking about adding that in your system to be communicated, I think is very helpful.
And it's just not going to be one. I know everyone said they just want one. It's going to be a suite of them that are out there.
Including email.
Yeah, including email. Yeah. And I don't see any comments about it, but obviously you can talk to it. The only reason I bring that up is I'm told that's, the CIO is being asked that question, so I'll help them out. And I've worked with others that have asked that question to me to get a pretty consistent response from me about it. So Jody, as wearing the many hats that you do, including the product manager for us. I know Jennifer Dawn, you do the project manager for us, but I appreciate you playing this role. Can you give us an update, and I'll add some things too about our Go Guardian implementation.
Well, I'll do my best, David. I kind of was thinking through as we were going through these last items. I'd mentioned in the staff meeting a few weeks ago how, internet access is probably the highest visibility issue that we have, right? Like these things that you just finished talking about, they all are kind of hinging on internet access being available, and right. And so I think of our CIOs in the summer where you've got people turning in devices at the end of the year, and that computer could have tire tracks on it. When they hand it in, what's the matter with it? Well, the internet's not working. That's just the default response to any problem you're having. The internet's not working. And so when you have a project like this where we are intentionally making changes to the internet experience, I think it's got your users on high alert, it's got your CIOs on high alert. And so obviously there's been a lot of attention around this, and certainly none of us on our end want to have anybody having a bad internet experience. And so definitely sympathetic to our tech leaders, just because of the visibility of something like this and the importance around it, right? It just has to go well, because if the internet's not working, then people just assume that technology is a failure, and none of us want that, right? But we are at a good place. As June 30 approaches, the big metric that we knew that we could quantify were people switching their DNS services over to Go Guardian. Pleased to report that by the end of this week, all of those that are planning to switch over those services will have done so. That's 150 some odd districts. We're down to single digits that need to complete that work. And just a big thank you goes out to all parties involved. Our tech leaders and folks in districts have done a lot of things to get ready for that in a very compressed time. You know, our partner GoGuardian, our staff internally, there's a lot of work that's going on there to try to make that, even that portion of the process a success. And I'm not saying that to try to imply that there's some big end zone dance coming. I mean, we know the work continues, right? Districts are still doing a lot of work with getting the Lightspeed client off of devices. We've talked previously about, you know, some of the shot clock aspects of that and the need to get that done, getting the GoGuardian apps and extensions installed, you know, confirming policy settings. You know, the work continues. And so, you know, our big priority was certainly on 630. We've got to leave everybody in a compliant state, if not a perfect state. So districts we know are still doing work, working with GoGuardian and our staff to try to optimize that environment and get things exactly like we want it. I will mention, you know, we've got a small group of districts, about 14 or so, that have waived to use a Lightspeed or a different solution. If you are using any product instead of or in addition to GoGuardian, two things should have and should be occurring. One, we should have a waiver submitted that indicates your intent, just so we can keep track of that. And two, you should be working with or have already worked with those alternate providers to be sure that you are also in some sort of compliant state as of July 1, because we know that, you know, for districts that are transitioning over, you know, those Lightspeed services cease to some extent as of 7/1. And so I don't want anybody to be left in a non-compliant state. So these folks that are waiving or using something different, you don't want you to think we've forgotten about you. We just know and acknowledge that a lot of that is on you to complete that work as well. I will say, we've had, a part of our implementation process, we've been powering down those Lightspeed Smart Shield servers for districts that will no longer need those. That's happening about a week after you transition. If you are in that interim mode right now, where you have those devices still turned on, don't forget to run those final reports and make sure that you don't have any DNS traffic traversing those servers. We still have a few instances where troubleshooting reveals that you still have some traffic going through those. Naturally, when we power those servers down, because we assume that all that work is completed, you can affect some services again. Just make sure that you've got reports that you can run instructions on how to do that. Make sure that your traffic is has stopped traversing those servers where, in the cases where it should. We'll mention too, you know, we continue to work with GoGuardian on a number of topics beyond just getting fully implemented. You heard on the last webcast, they've got some very intentional efforts ongoing to improve the app experience, the product itself. I know they're on track to release a new version, I believe, of the GoGuardian app around the 1st of July. One of the things mentioned again by several districts, by some of our staff, is the need for better reporting and diagnostics to make sure that, you know, if that app is causing a device to not function as it should, help us have a better idea as to why. And so they're making improvements to that app that should improve that experience. There's the feature flag that they worked on to try to improve. If you had to do deeper troubleshooting, to be able to turn on some logging for that, to be able to get some deeper logs, just as with many of your other products, right, where you can turn on back-end logging to get more detailed statistics and data to be able to troubleshoot things. I will mention too, a lot of interest around that the beta version of that DNS version 2 on premise. That beta is underway. We are getting access to that tool. I'll just full disclosure here. I mean, we've got some things in our office that we have to resolve on two fronts. One, we want to make sure that solution functions technically the way we would expect. And frankly, when you look at our agenda and some of our long-term plans for the state, you know, we got to figure out strategically where best that solution would reside. When you start talking about on-premise and DNS in the same sentence, obviously our ears perk up from a technical perspective. We just want to make sure that however that gets put in place to help school districts is supportable, sustainable, that sort of thing. And I will also say finally, we are finalizing details with GoGuardian to continue or to restart, however you want to phrase it, the office hours concept for the start of school period. We recognize that, you know, we put this product in very quickly with start of school approaching. We're asking them to kind of target some dates and times where we could have and continue that office hours approach where people could stop in, additional support assistance. It's looking like that may start around July 21st to give us a little time for folks that are turning on devices, bringing staff on site in advance of start of school, hoping to run that through ideally at least September. Again, we recognize and they recognize that with this being the first school year using a new product, that there's obviously going to be things that we've uncovered that, despite our best efforts at testing, we couldn't capture in the late spring. And so definitely appreciate GoGuardian recognizing that and trying to ramp up support efforts and give our tech leaders another method to kind of get some more direct access to help. So David, I'll let you elaborate further as needed.
Thank you, Jody. And I do want to thank everyone on our team and the districts and GoGuardian staff for the great progress that's been made in a very short period of time. We've made a transition of 92% of Kentucky K-12 organizations, which is pretty remarkable in that period of time to be switched over. And there'll be efforts for the to transition and address the other 8%. We may not get it to 100%, but we want to get it to as close to that as possible. As you mentioned, is one of the things that I think will help X number of those districts, and that 8% is this additional functionality being added. We can see that from their comments of why they were holding back. We had one district in particular, they were struck pretty hard by a weather disaster and has delayed it. And I suspect that one will be transitioning over, but we wanted to give them obviously more time to do that. Lightspeed, for the remaining folks, had said, we'll pay for a year for you to continue on to use our service. And so that's kept X% on there for additional years, give them a year to evaluate whether the additional functionality is added and meets the requirements that they have out there, and just their time frame. And they can just watch and see how things are going. I can tell you just from my perspective, they're going, very well. Nothing's 100% perfect. We're all the time, just like we had with the previous implementation with Lightspeed initial implementation, there was fine tuning of it, and we're going through the same kind of thing with the GoGuardian part of it. But I appreciate the GoGuardian team, Jody, your efforts to take a job on top of a job. I appreciate that to do it well, and you've done well with that. Jennifer, I appreciate you keeping us on task with it, as you've done with the NGKI and now with this effort. So very appreciative. In districts, and just so you know, I do want to mention that, our field staff do a good job, because every month we have an OET team huddle, just like we have this meeting here. And we give a chance for our field staff to explain a heartbeat what's going on in school districts. And the field staff are already really good about explaining, this is not the only thing that you all are doing. And they list all this thing, they put up on a board of all the other things that you have going on during the summertime. And so we recognize that, and our staff does, and we're constantly reminded that you have other things on your radar screen to do. And so we're appreciative of you working this in. We try to stay in tune with that. And our field staff do an excellent job with our heartbeat from the field part that we give on our OET huddle is telling folks what's going on out there. So it's just not the things that we're most interested in, but it's also things that you got going on beyond what we're doing. So I appreciate you all working that in. A closely related topic to this, and I'll have Matt Jury talk about this, is the firewall service role in internet filtering. So Matt, could you talk about what we're doing with the GoGuardian part as it relates to the GoGuardian implementation? And it's something similar we did for the Lightspeed implementation. So Matt, if you could take that on.
Yep, absolutely. So to rewind the clock a little bit, for those who've been around for quite some time, you'll remember that back in 2020, when we moved from Lightspeed Rocket to the Lightspeed Relay architecture, we offered an option to block adult content at the firewall level. And we did that because in the event that a device did not have the application on it, we still could block that content. Examples, some other content that we block are peer-to-peer file sharing, proxy services, malicious websites, phishing sites, spam URLs, and things like that. But we added adult content as an option for districts to opt in to block that. And we had 80 districts, plus or minus, opt in on that. And then when we made the move to ENA with the Fortinet firewalls, some of those rule sets did not translate one-to-one compared to our compared to Checkpoint that we had previously. So we worked with Fortinet It was quite the process to figure out how to do this again. And we've had several districts testing this for the last several months. It's worked flawlessly for them. So now we're circling back and we're enabling that for all of the districts who'd previously opted in, and we'll be doing that on June the 24th, which is when that'll go into effect. It'll take place in the middle of the night, should cause no issues for you all. But if you're one of those districts and you think, well, I don't even remember, I didn't work here in 2020, I don't know if my district opted in or not, I'm going to work to put together a list that'll be sent to all the KEs by the end of the day that shows who those districts were. And we'll also include a process in there that if you're a district that says, oh, I'd actually like to turn that on, I don't know why that we didn't opt into that previously, we'll document that process and show you how to open a ticket to have that turned on for you all as well. So that's the update on that. And I will toss in one more additional update that's not on the agenda, which is Windows 10 goes end of support October the 14th of 2025. I know that this has been on the KE agenda for a very long time, and districts are working toward migrating to Windows 11. But just a quick reminder, October 14th, 2025, that is when the shot clock runs out. So if you're looking to migrate to Windows 11 right now during the summertime would be the time to do that.
Thank you, Matt.
Yes, sir.
Marty, quick update on the queues with general automation. I know we're doing it in phases.
Yeah. So the early adopters are completing user acceptance testing right now. And that's targeted by the end of this week. That's going very well. They'll move into kind of that log review and confirming federation with Google and Active Directory. We're very excited about that with our early adopter group. As mentioned before, we're in the middle. If you're one of our 43 districts in cohort 1, as David mentioned, with some of the other projects going on and implementations, like there's a lot going on. And so we recognize that if you're one of the 43 districts in cohort 1, you have a lot of activities in front of you. And had folks in introduction calls. 26 of those 43 districts, if you're one of those in cohort 1, are working through data validation. So 26 of the 40, that's great. So we're moving right along there. As a reminder, cohort 1 is split into two groups. There's 24 districts in group 1 and 19 districts in group 2. But that work continues through cohort 1. On the technical, so that was all about implementation and enablement. On the technical side, there's just a quick update. Identity Automation, as a great partner, has successfully tested some of the Active Directory password work that we know is needed. And so we have internally with our project team some follow-up testing there in our test environments. That's going on. That work will be going on. We'll be able to share that. And then we have also, I want to say, Dr. John Logan at this point, with all this work that he's been a part of for years and years, is in the middle of testing some of that user experience before we'll green light that through the project. And so, David, all that work is going well. We've had some moments where we have to dig back in and think about some of the scenarios moving forward, but we want to. It's green and thumbs up at this point, and we're starting to see some really good movement.
Thank you.
Marty, sorry, David, Kenny and I have been testing the password sync, and it was, as of this morning, successful. So ready to start moving forward on that.
That's awesome. Thank you, John.
Thanks. Last item is a item of celebration. For a lot of moving parts, got to work well for the Kentucky Summit of Online Testing to work, and it did. It set a new state record for the number of tests that were given. Obviously, there's certain students that take multiple tests with it, but to get over, I think, 1.5 million, getting close to 1.6 million. So there's a lot of things got to go right within the district and beyond the district. And so I appreciate all that made that happen to get that across the finish line. If we could show just in closing some of the results of the Go Soapbox questions, if you can kind of go through those, and I'll take a look if there's any other things in the chat that we need to hit.
So David, can I jump in just on a few things, but while you're looking at those?
Go ahead.
All right. So just before the next webcast, I just want to let everybody know the school report card will open up. It'll be a phased process like usual. The first one will be school safety. So expect that by mid-July, the school report card will open up. You're not going to see any bills and whistles at that point in time. It's just, but you will see some new trend type views this year that you didn't see last year as we move forward. Just a reminder, this is a great time of year to be looking at open house. Make sure your school information is correct, your grade levels, if they're changing, they get updated in DASSER, and your contacts are correct. The other thing, online registration and campus learning will sunset on June 30th. So most of our districts did go ahead and sign on to keep that. I know last I heard we had about 33 districts that had not responded, but that will sunset at that point in time. I hope that's not impactful to anybody that might have missed something. So some legislative updated work that's going on besides Senate Bill 181 is Senate Bill 19 on moral instruction. We will have Infinite Campus tracking moral instruction service providers, as well as a new tracking mechanism for House Bill 241 for virtual students. So more information on that to come out soon. There was a question about tools that folks are using for tracking Infinite Campus users and making sure that Infinite Campus users, one, still need access. Two, do they need the level of access they've got? And I'll click a QRC link in there so that you all can see that. And David already mentioned and we talked about the transparent trackable communication, but there was some e-transcript training if your folks didn't get an opportunity to watch that. It is recorded on the same link I sent out earlier at the training page. And we have some beginning of year training on July 17th. So we can provide some additional information on that. All that information is on the training page, though.
And David, we have the poll results.
Thanks, Diddy.
Have the poll results up. I know we're closing out here. 58% yes, have reviewed the access to electronic media policy. 42 are still working through that. And as we can see on screen, 53% kind of lead the charge with district have a process in place for regularly reviewing IC user accounts. So 53% say no, not sure. So no or not sure. And 47% are saying yes, which we obviously think is great. And then we're getting some feedback on that last question, some open kind of response there.
Okay.
So real
Right.
quickly before you just shut things down.
Okay.
I just want to put a reminder out there. I know a lot of our vendor partners are in attendance, and we've got our annual vendor partner meeting on the afternoon of July 9th. So look for additional details regarding that. Most all should already have a placeholder on your calendar, but it's important for as many of our partners to join for that, as we'll share information about where we are, where we're going, and we'll be looking for feedback and input into our thought process for how we move things forward.
Well, thanks. Thanks for joining us here in June. Hope you have a good rest of the month, and we'll see you next time in July. Take care, everyone.